Hello and welcome to Precon Decon, the video series where I deconstruct the pre-constructed decks of Magic the Gathering's history. In this video we're going to be finishing up our look at the Torment set and we're looking at Waking Nightmares, which is a black and red deck. So let's just get straight on into it. We have a deck list here, so we have 22 creatures, 5 enchantments, 5 instants, 5 sorceries, 23 land, mana curve off to the side there as normal. So let's start looking at some of these cards. So, the main theme strategy of the deck is basically Nightmare Tribal, and this was a creature type that was introduced in Torment. I really like the Nightmares just because I think the art is really cool. But I mean, art does not necessarily mean a card is good, so let's actually look at some of these cards. So the gimmick of Nightmares is that when they enter the battlefield, they do something. So like they might make opponent discard or lose life or something like that. And then when they leave the battlefield, basically the effect is reversed. It's like, oh, the nightmare is gone, so you get your thing back or whatever. Which is like, I think that's a really cool flavor. It's interesting how that is now like more of a white ability in modern Magic. Stuff like Banishing Light or Banisher Priest, stuff like that, where something is locked out only as long as the creature or enchantment or whatever is on the battlefield. So it's interesting that kind of mechanic started off with Oblivion Ring used to be a black effect, apparently, which is interesting. So let's look at these nightmares. So 3 Faceless Butcher, which I think might win the prize for the best name, best card name in all of Magic, because that is a great name. So Faceless Butcher, 4 mana for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a creature other than Faceless Butcher, and when he leaves play, the exiled creature comes back into play under its owner's control. 3 of them, which is really good. I really like Faceless Butcher. It is basically Black Oblivion Ring with a 2/3 attached, on a 2/3 body, which does make it more vulnerable to removal because it's a creature. But yeah, I think it's really good. A really sneaky thing is that there are 3 of them in this deck, so you can always force a draw by doing the kind of infinite loop of Faceless Butcher. Basically, what it means if you have 1 down, you cast a second Faceless Butcher, you exile the first one, which then goes, and then you cast the third Faceless Butcher, which exiles the second one. That's left the battlefield, so then the first one comes back in, which then exiles the third one, which means the second one comes back. You can do that loop and kind of like just force a draw if you wanted to do that. 3 Mesmeric Fiends. This is pretty good. I think 2 mana for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, an opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, and it gets exiled. And then when the Fiend leaves play, the exiled cards go back to owner's hand. So yeah, that's pretty good effect for 2 mana. I think essentially like a essentially like a coercion effect. Again attached to a body, and I just think it's pretty good. Soul Scourge, 3/2 flyer for 5. When it comes in, someone loses 3, and then when it leaves play, they gain 3. So yeah, pretty good. Potential like 6-point kind of life swing from that, because you could play it, they lose 3, and then next turn attack it, attack for 3 in the air. So 3 of all of these, which I think is really good. And then only 1 copy of the other 2. So these are like not as good, these nightmares. I mean, the art is still really great. So Grave Gouger is just a 2/2 for 3. It just exiles cards from a graveyard, and then they come back when the Grave Gouger leads. Not as useful as the other 3. Honestly, like exiling cards from a graveyard is still useful, but it's a lot more niche of an effect. It's not something that really typically impacts the board that much, although it can take away threshold or flashback cards, for example. And Slithery Stalker is I think it's just a 1/1, might be a 2/1 with Swamp Walk. Like a Clever Boy, I've covered up the power and toughness. But it's Faceless Butcher, but it only affects green or white creatures. So it's just not as good as Faceless Butcher, really. But yeah, a lot of these nightmare creatures, really good, strong, like tribal feel to the deck. I really like it. And then emphasizing that is one of the deck's rares is Chainer Dementia Master. So really cool to always get a legendary creature as one of the rares in one of these precons. That would have been really exciting, I think, to like a new player, or a new or a younger player picking up one of these decks. Like they see it on the shelf and they get it and they open up like, whoa, this guy's like a legend. Like that's I don't know. I just think that's really cool. Just have a legendary creature as one of the rares. So he is 5 mana for 3/3. Gives all nightmares +1/+1. It does affect all nightmares, so that is it's not just yours; it is the whole board. But his ability is very spicy. Triple black, pay 3 life, put a creature from a graveyard into play under your control. It is a black nightmare in addition to its creature types. That's super cool. Just the fact he reanimates. He can reanimate opponents' creatures, turn them into nightmares, which obviously then get the buff. Super good. But when he leaves the battlefield, all nightmares get exiled, which is kind of a huge downside. If you played it and you have a board full of nightmares, that is a risk you're taking. But I think his ability is just so fun and so interesting. So yeah, really good rare to include there. It'd be weird to have a nightmare deck and not have Chainer in it, I think. And then the other rare in the deck is a little disappointing though. It's Petrodon, so it's one of the non-black nightmares. So there were some in red. I think these are actually the only two. There might be another one. I can't think of the other one. But there's definitely these two, and then there are a few in blue, like the Wormfang creatures. But the Petrodon is 8 mana for a 5/6, so very, very expensive. When it comes in play, you exile 2 lands, and then when he leaves play, those lands come back, and it's got fire breathing. 8 mana is very, very expensive. By the time that's come down, exiling 2 lands doesn't really matter, I think, that much, because your opponent is also likely to have sort of like maybe 6 or 7 or 8 land or whatever. So losing 2 at that point is not really like a big deal to them, I suppose. Just very expensive, and I don't think it could have been a 7/7. I think it would have been fine. And then Petrovark is 4 mana for a 2/2. When he enters the battlefield, exile a land, and then when he leaves play, return the land back to play. Fine, essentially like a sort of a semi-stone rain ability attached to a 2/2. It's fine, I think. It's a nightmare, so he gets the bonus from Chainer as well. Sorry. I don't think these red nightmares are as good as the black ones, personally. And then we have a few more other red creatures. So 3 Barbarian Outcasts, 2 mana for a 2/2. But if you control no swamps, you have to sacrifice him. So that's just pretty bad. We are still a long way off from red being able to get a 2/2 for 2 with no drawbacks. Still a long way off from that. 2 Pardic Collaborator. I don't think this guy's too terrible. 4 mana for a 2/2 with first strike, and he has a like a shade ability where you just pay black mana to give him +1/+1 to turn. That's I generally think that's not terrible for the time. Because I guess you would say what for the time a 2/2 first strike would probably be 3 mana. Giving him the shade ability would probably tackle. I think it's fairly costed, and a shade ability on something the first strike is I think very strong. And then a single enslaved dwarf, 1 mana for 1/1, 1 red and sacrifice it. Target black creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike turn and turn. Very small effect, but still, giving first strike is usually a very good combat trick. This could definitely be worse. It's just very niche in the fact that they only hit black creatures. I don't think this would have been over the top if it also could affect red creatures. Say, I don't know, but yeah. And then we have some black spells. So we have a single Caustic Tar, very expensive aura that goes on a land, but then the land has tap. Target player loses 3 life. So it basically lets the land double up as a I was going to say a lightning bolt. It's not technically a lightning bolt because it is just life lost. If the game is stalling, that's a good way to end it, just by turning a land into a kind of a clock that way. Just tap it and just lose 3. It's very expensive though. Malevolent Awakening. This is pretty great. I think this is a card that was in the Sacrilege deck. 1 colours and 2 black. 1 and 2 black, sacrifice a creature, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I just think that's very good. there is I think a sneaky trick with this and the nightmares. I won't go to it too much, but it basically involves activating this ability depending on when their abilities are like resolving. So like you play a nightmare and you put its one of its abilities on the stack, and then you do this, and like it makes basically whatever they exile permanent. It's I won't go into it too much because it would sound like nonsense, but that is a potential if you want to do that. And I imagine if you did do that at the time, it would have felt very unfair to your opponent, and there's probably a lot of arguments over rules in schoolyards and over kitchen tables about that. Single Shades form, 3 mana. This is an aura that goes on a creature, gives it a shade ability. And when the enchanted creature dies, it goes back into play under your control. Works on your opponent's creatures as well. So if you put this on an opponent's creature, kill it, you get their creature, which is pretty fun. And then 2 Rancid Earth, 3 mana, sorcery, just destroys a land. But if you have Threshold, which is 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you destroy the land, and Rancid Earth deals 1 damage to each creature and each player, which is alright. So it just can do a little kind of little damage across the board there if it's needed. Just clear out like X1s. And then a couple of red spells, so 2 Temporary Insanity. I think this might be the first case of red getting a temporary control effect. So this is, I mean, like nowadays we're used to red having the temporary control effects, like, oh, I steal a creature, return and use it or whatever. Stuff like Act of Treason. I think this is the first one because up until now, blue used to have this effect. Blue basically also always had the gain control effects, and sometimes it was I permanently gain control of it, and sometimes it was like, oh, I just gain control of it end of turn. I think this is the first card where it became like, okay, red is going to get this effect now, where it's temporary theft. But I mean, that's a weird little bit of trivia. But temporary insanity. I mean, I don't think it's super good. I mean, it's very expensive, 4 mana for like a threaten effect. Untapped target creature with power less than the number of cards in your graveyard gain control of the turn. It gains haste on turn. The one saving grace, it is an instant, so this can always be used, I suppose, to remove an attacker. Turn an attacking creature into a blocker. Is always a fun trick to do with an instant speed active treason effect like that, I suppose. We have 2 Pyromanias, so this is 3 mana enchantments, so this is one of the disorders. We've seen all the others in the other Torment decks, this is the red one. It is unfortunately the worst one, because it couldn't just be discard a card, it has to be discard a card at random, because it's a red card, and we can't have red players choosing what to discard. It has to be random because then it feels more red. This is a very weak effect. 1 card from 1 red. Discard a card at random. Random discard is horrible. And just to do 1 damage to a creature or player. Yeah, no, that's really bad. If it was like 2 damage, you could argue for it, but 1 damage is super weak. This is a horrible card. Really disappointing that it's not sort of better than it could be, really. And then a single Flaming Gambit. This is pretty bad as well, I think. So it's an instant speed blaze. Well, it's not blaze, is it? Because it can't target creatures technically. So it's instant speed, X damage to a player, and then but they can choose to have they can choose to have the damage dealt to a creature they control instead. Like, all right, it's got flashbacks, so you can do it twice, but like this is bad. There's a whole kind of string of these red, um, what's the best word for them? Not Punisher cards, but like these kind of like red spells in Torment where you do a thing and your opponent has a choice in how it like turns out. So in this one, like, I could damage you, and like, oh, I don't want to take the damage. I want to do, please, like take one of my creatures instead. Leave me alone. And it's just horrible because it gives your opponent a choice in how your spell works, which is just generally not great. This is definitely like the weakest one. Basically, this is only good if your opponent has no creatures at all, which is very rarely going to happen. Yeah, because even if you could pump all your mana to this, say like do a X is 10, but as long as they've got even 1 creature, they'd be like, well, I'm not going to take 10 damage. My 1 creature is going to take 10 damage instead. So yeah, not great Flaming Gambit in my opinion. And then closing off here, so we've got 2 Flame Burst. Really frustrating. It's not a full playset of Flame Burst, because it's a card that gets better when you have more of them. 2 firebolts. This is pretty good. I like firebolt. 2 damage target creature or player at sorcery speed, and you can flash it back for 5. I just think it's pretty good. Just a really solid kind of common burn spell. Single demolish, destroy artifacts or lands. It's the one thing I've noticed in these like Odyssey block decks. We don't see a lot of these kind of utility cards like demolish or like. I mean, I'm obviously not disenchant because disenchant's not in the set at all. But I haven't seen a lot of like utility cards as we have in like the older decks. Like with Urza's or Mercadian Mask or something. I feel like you couldn't go. Like every deck had some sort of like disenchant effect or destroy all enchantments or I don't know. But a single demolish, I do like demolish. Actually, I don't think it's terrible. Just because if there is an artifact land, you can artifact out. You can at least hit a land with it. I mean, it's more expensive than pillage, but it's less coloured mana, so it's basically the same. And then 2 Tainted Peaks, which is just a dual land, but it's conditional. You have to have a swamp. So yeah, what could have been on this one? So kind of slim pickings actually here. I generally think most of the deck is actually okay. Just kind of let down by some kind of subpar red burn spells. I think Longhorn Firebeast would have been okay. I have a bit of soft spot for this card. I don't know. I liked it for some reason. It's a 3 mana 3/2, which is actually decently costed for the time. When it ends the battlefield, an opponent can have it deal 5 damage to him or her. If they do, they sacrifice it. And I guess my thinking was like, it's either it's a 3/2 for 3, which is an okay cost, or an opponent is going to take 5 damage from it. Like, I feel like that's one of the. It's still not good because it gives an opponent a choice. You might want to add to your board, and they might be able to tank 5 damage. But yeah, I think this is one of the better red spells that did this kind of effect. I think instead of the Petrodon, was it Petrodon or Petrovarch? Petrodon's the big one, I think. Laquatus' Champion would have been really fun. It's another nightmare. Big 6 mana, comes in, takes 6 life away from someone, and it has regenerate for a single black mana. Like, I just think it's really, really good. And the artwork of this is really nostalgic for me. Like one of my local game shops back in the day had like a big poster of this artwork, like had a big blown up version of this art. So yeah, I have some fondness for Laquatus' Champion. And then I just thought Pardic Arsonist. This, I mean, it's 4 mana for 3/3, and if you have Threshold, when he comes in, he does 3 damage to a creature or a player. It's all right. It does Bolt when he comes in. Yeah, I think it's okay. So in summary, I think this is my favorite out of the Torment theme decks. Just because I'm a sucker for like a tribal theme. I really like the nightmares. I really like kind of them mechanically. I like the artwork on them. I think they're just cool, gross, creepy creatures. I just think and also like having Chainer in here is like really fun. So yeah, this is the one I think out of all the Torment theme decks I would have been the most excited to own and have and play. I don't know how it would have worked in paper. I didn't own it myself, but I would have liked to have owned it if I had known about it kind of at the time. But I mean, if you owned it, let me know. Like, did you have fun playing it? Was it actually as good as I would like to think it is? Did you make any changes to it? Yeah, stick a comment below. And yeah, we'll have a little discussion about it. But that is it now for the Torment theme decks. So in the next video, we're going to make a start on Judgment, which, I mean, spoiler alert on that. I won't get excited about the Judgment ones. The Judgment ones are kind of, but we'll see that when we get to them. I'm still going to have fun looking at them and discussing them, I guess. But yeah, until then, thank you for watching, listening, and have a great day.